Hello friends, I welcome you again to this channel. Friends, in the last video, we discussed the definitions and functions of criticism. And today, we are going to discuss the important qualifications of a critique. What are the qualities of a good critique in literature? That is the point of the discussion today. Friends, as I told you earlier in my previous video, criticism is as old as creative art. Criticism is as old as human civilization. And because literature has a very serious role to play in the nation, in molding of the nation, that is the reason why criticism also has a very important role to play. Because criticism is that branch of knowledge which keeps on improving the quality of literature as published by the authors in any nation. Criticism is an art which keeps an eye on literature. If some merits are there, they are appreciated by the critics. If some demerits are there, some suggestions to the authors are offered by the critique. So, a critique plays a very important role in literature. The primary job of the critique is to classify, to study, to analyze, to compare, to interpret, to evaluate a work of art, and then to enlighten both the authors and the readers. Friends, to begin with, let's first of all have a look at the origin of the term criticism. The term criticism actually it comes from Greek language. In Greek language, the word which was used was kritikos, 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 and in those times it meant to judge. To judge means to take judgment on anything was known as kritikos, and from this word kritikos the word criticism is derived. In the 2nd century the word was changed, and a new word came into existence, and that was criticus, Criticus, and it meant the interpretation of the texts and words. So now the meaning is shortened. Now the focus was on literature, on the text and on the words. So criticus. From criticus, then again the form of the word is changed and it became the word criticism. But remember, criticism is the art of interpreting art. Before we discuss the important qualifications of the critique, important qualities of a good critique, first of all, just have a look at the definitions, some very popular definitions of criticism. One given by none other than father of English literature, father of English criticism, John Dryden. John Dryden wants to say that those who think that the primary business of criticism is to find faults, they are mistaken. They are wrong. The primary function of criticism is not to find the faults. Criticism, according to Dryden, was first instituted, was pioneered by the great Greek philosopher and critic Aristotle. And according to Aristotle, as Dryden said, criticism meant a standard of judging well. To judge well was the primary job of criticism according to Aristotle, and John Dryden goes in the same line. I.A. Richards, the modern critic of English literature, he also defines criticism by saying that to set up as a critic is to set up as a judge of values. Though the primary function, according to Richards, is to find out the values from a work of art, to find out the merits of the work of art. Walter Pater also says that criticism is the art of interpreting art. Criticism, according to Walter Pater, is an intermediary between the author and the reader. Criticism explains one to the other, explains literature to the readers, right? So, critiques are the link between the author and the reader according to Walter Pater. Now friends, let's start discussing the important qualifications or important qualities of a good critique. Because the best critique, as you understand, that the best critique of engineering should be an engineer. In the same manner, it is unanimously believed that the best critique of poetry should be a poet. No doubt there are some controversies, there are some debates about this, whether a critic should be a poet or not, or whether a poet is a poet and a critic is a critic. Some debates are going on, but it is generally believed that a good critic is one who is also a good poet. John Dryden, Goethe, Matthew Arnold, all these were great philosophers, great poets, and at the same time they were equally great critics of their times, right? They have been able to tell us how the work begins, what its technique is, and what its end is. Because they themselves write poetry, they know the ins and outs of this art of writing poetry, and that's why they became good critics also. So, the first thing you must remember is that a critic must be an artist. A great critic must be a great artist. Another important quality of a critic is that every great critic must be a well-read scholar. He must have gathered the knowledge of the world, the knowledge of the old literatures of the world. A good critic must be a well-read man. He must be a voracious reader. He must have an appetite for learning. He should have read the ancient literature and the modern literature. Why? Because the work of art that he wants to criticize, it must have some allusions, some references from past, from olden scriptures and holy books and all. So, if the critic has this knowledge of the scriptures, the past literature, the ancient literature, then he will be able to understand it, and then he will be able to evaluate that work of art in the truest sense of the word. Say for example, if he wants to take a judgment on an old work of art, he must think of the allusions, he must know the mythology and ancient philosophies of that particular culture. If he judges a modern book, then he should be aware of the modern trends in literature, modern trends in the modern literary theories and all. So, a good critique, in short, you can say, is an amalgamation of knowledge. He must have gathered all knowledge past and present. Another important quality of a good critic is that he must have proper knowledge of human life and human nature. Why? Because literature is the reflection of human life, it is the reflection of human nature. The critic should have this knowledge of life from which the creative writer, the author, has come out. He must have a proper understanding of the complex human nature, how the people behave in a particular situation. This psychological aspects of human life, of human nature, he must be able to understand these things. It is only after that the critic will be able to appreciate a work of art, because the work of art is based on that thing only. Every work of art is based on human nature. It expresses human life. Another important characteristic quality of a good critic is a powerful command on language. A critic must have a proper command on the language. Why? Because every piece of literature, every work of art, in this the author expresses only through the medium of language. Language is the only tool of expression adopted by the authors. And if the critic cannot understand the language of the author, then it becomes difficult for him to take judgment, to interpret that work of art. Why? Because an artist, the author presents his ideas, his emotions, his thoughts in the form of words, in the form of some images, in the form of some concepts, and these concepts, images, ideas are expressed through words, and if they are not intelligible to the critic, then the critic's judgment is not going to be an authentic judgment. So, to take an authentic judgment on a work of art, the critic must be able to understand the language. Sometimes some critics, some poets, some authors use very phraseological language, highly dignified language, but the critic must be able to understand that. So, a good command on language is again a very important quality of a good critique. Another important thing is that the critic must first of all gather some biographical details about the author. Because if you have studied William Henry Hudson, W.H. Hudson has written a book called An Introduction to the Study of Literature. In that book, William Henry Hudson said that literature is the expression of the author's personality. If you want to understand, if you want to enjoy the work of art, you first of all have to understand the life of the author, the mind and heart of the author. And to understand the mind and heart and personality of the author, we need to understand we need to get some biographical details of the author. So when a critic wants to criticize, when a critic wants to give some comments on a work of art, first of all he needs to understand the personality of the author. Okay, he needs to gather these biographical details of the author. A good critic should have some proper knowledge of the author's life. Why? Because you say, for example, Christopher Marlowe has written these 4 great tragedies. In all his 4 tragedies, his heroes are presented as highly materialistic kind of people, highly ambitious people. Why? Because Marlowe himself in his own life was a materialistic minded man. In his life, he himself was an ambitious person. So, to understand Marlowe's characters, first of all, if you read the biography of Christopher Marlowe, you will get an idea, you will get the answer to the question why Marlowe's characters are so highly ambitious, right? So, the point is that to understand a work of art, we must understand the biography of the author. Charles Dickens, Charles Lamb, Mahatma Gandhi, all these works written by these writers, they, if you want to get a proper idea, if you want to evaluate their works, it is better, first of all, you read about the life of these authors. They are going to be helpful to you. So, as a critic, it is mandatory, it is very important that you understand the biographies of the author. Another important quality of a critic is sensibility. Why? Because literature expresses the sentiments, the emotions of the author. Okay, and if the critique is not sensible enough, if the critique is not sensitive enough to understand the emotions expressed by the author, then his judgment is not going to be a proper judgment. Literature is an art which expresses the sentiments of the writer, and that's why the critic, first of all, must have that quality, that sensibility to understand and feel the emotions which were felt by the author when the author wrote that particular work of art. So, sensibility is also an important qualification of a critic. Another important quality of a critic is neutral attitude or indifference. Let me tell you about one very important experiment which was conducted by I.A. Richards in his class. I.A. Richards, he was a professor of criticism, and he did one experiment in the class. On the first day, he gave a copy of a poem to all the students. Okay, at the end of the poem, the name of the poet was written, William Shakespeare, and he gave this copy, same copy, to all his students. And then he asked the students to write their views, their comments on this poetry, on the poem which was given to them. Okay, the students read the poem and they also read the name of the author at the end of the poem. Okay, so the students were given some time, about 30 minutes or so. After 30 minutes, I.A. Richards, the professor, collected all their comments and he went back home. Next day, Richards came with another poem, okay, but this time the poem was without the name of the author, without the name of the poet. So, plain poem was given, and again he gave the same poem to all his students, and again he asked the students to write their comments on the poem. After 30 minutes or so, he collected all their comments and went back home. Next day again I.A. Richards came with both the copies which he received on the first day and the copies which he received on the second day. Surprising thing was that on the first day the students commented on the poem and all the students appreciated the poem. And on the second day, the poem was given to the students. The second day the students commented, and students pointed out at some merits and also at some demerits of the poem. Why? Because the first day the students read the name of William Shakespeare, that, oh, This is the poem written by William Shakespeare. So, William Shakespeare is such a great poet, such a great writer. So, no need to examine the demerits of the poem, and that's why the students appreciated that poem. On the second day, the name of the poet was not written, and surprisingly, let me tell you, that poem was also written by William Shakespeare, but the students found out some demerits in the poem. So, the point is that a good critique is one who is indifferent. A good critique is one who is neutral. He must keep his likes and dislikes away from his criticism. When a critic wants to criticize a work of art, his likes and his dislikes have no role to play. He must have the objective approach towards his work of art. Imagine that a doctor is operating a patient and the blood comes out and he becomes so much sensitive. Oh my God, the patient is bleeding. Then the doctor won't be able to operate the patient. So, criticism is an art, but it requires objective attitude. It requires neutral approach towards the work of art. Okay, so a good critic is one who is no doubt sensitive. Who sensitive? Why? Because he needs this sensibility to understand the work of art, to understand the feelings as expressed by the author, but at the same time, his comments on the work of art must be very much objective and impersonal. So, friends, before we end up this discussion, let me conclude that a good critic is one who has enough knowledge about human life and human nature. He must have the knowledge of the great works of art. Why? Because as Arnold said, comparison must be done. Matthew Arnold talked about the touchstone theory. I'll talk about this later on in some another video about Matthew Arnold. But comparison, if you want to find out whether a particular work of art is great or not, you need to compare it with masterpieces, with great works of art already existing in our times. So, knowledge about the world literature, objective, impersonal approach, indifference, all these are the qualities of a good critique. Moreover, a good critic is one who gathers some biographical details of the author. A good critic is one who has achieved a powerful command on language. He must be able to understand and discern the superficial and hidden meanings from the works of art. And a good critic must have that sensibility to feel what the writers, what the authors felt. And last but the most important thing is that a critic is one who knows various critical theories existing in the present time and critical theories which existed in the past also. And a critic must know all artistic techniques of writing literature. So, friends, here I come to the end of this discussion. If you have some doubts or queries, write to me in the comment section of this channel. I will come up with some new video on criticism. Till then, goodbye and have a nice day. Thank you.